Faster than a fraudulent performance measure, stronger than a misplaced decimal point, able to leap complex compliance requirements at a single bound. It's Super Auditor! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Auditors Save the World, one audit project at a time, where we bring you thrilling tales of daring audits and brave financial reviews. Here, our heroes don't wear capes, but they do wield the power of empirical evidence. Brought to you by the pros at Yellowbook-CPE. In each episode, we interview those legendary auditors who have truly rescued the day. Stay tuned, listeners, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And folks, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your podcast app of choice. And now, here's your host, Lita Hart-Fanta.
In a world where details can drown out the big picture, one hero emerged to save the day. Meet Stacey, a champion who mastered the art of not nitpicking every detail. She resisted the call to audit everything down to the last MFA, and by doing so, she unleashed a wave of change that rippled throughout the entire city. From small office cubicles to the bustling streets, her approach reshaped everything. So how'd she do it? Grab your capes, folks, and tune in. Stacey is about to reveal her story. What was your audit subject matter, and why did you choose to audit that subject matter?
You know, the audit I chose for the example today was one from a little bit ago. It was back in 2017, but it's definitely very relevant. It was an audit of our police department record management system.
Oh, okay.
And the reason why this audit came about was there were some known data quality issues within the existing system that multiple partners of this system from, the police department themselves, the court, and various other government agencies knew there were some issues and they were trying to work through it, but it wasn't moving as fast as probably it needed to be. And it got escalated up to the city manager's office. And there were some stories in the news that were coming out about it. So we knew it was time we needed to get in there and do an application controls audit, see really what was going on in the system and where were the weaknesses.
Well, what kind of data made it to the press that was not consistent? What kind of headlines were you getting?
I think the biggest one that was coming out is the inaccuracy of some reporting information that was shared with other partners regarding specific individuals and who were in custody and information associated with whatever they were being charged with. So obviously it's important that information needs to be correct.
Yeah.
So that was probably the biggest thing. And then internally, there was lots of concerns with duplicate information, specifically around citations that were being issued. So speeding tickets, car accidents, those type of citations.
So they were issuing two different citations, or when someone would come in and pay for their citation, there'd still be one sitting there because there's two of them in there?
There was a variety of different things, primarily probably mainly a lack of training for the officers. They wouldn't realize if they were fully submitting the transaction or if it was going through the system. And so maybe a second one would get created or would never get submitted, but the paper copy of the citation would get given to the citizen and they'd show up for court, but then the court had no record of the citation.
What a mess.
Yeah, so the public's frustrated, the court's frustrated.
Yeah, okay. And so tell me more about the data on the headlines. How did the press find out about this problem with the data? Folks who were incarcerated, how did the press get a hold of that?
My understanding that it was just information shared through whatever confidential sources may be, or just complaints from individuals that were being detained for crimes, but then getting released because their information wasn't fully transferred over to the court. And with every different type of thing somebody's charged with, they can only be held for so long before they have to be let go. So,
wow. Okay. That is a dramatic
Yeah,
That's got a lot of impacts, and it was all kind of rooted in the application that the police were using.
correct. They had began upgrading to a new application in 2015, and it took quite a long time to get it implemented. There were problems with the old data that was migrated into the system,
Oh,
and then just the controls within the system itself to ensure data accuracy were not configured to the standards that they needed to be.
wow. Okay, so was this like an off-the-shelf application that they bought or software? Was this something they paid a lot for? Or did they custom develop it?
Paid a lot for, and then tried to make it fit what we were doing. When you're implementing in a system, sometimes that isn't the best approach. Sometimes you need to modify your processes in order to not weaken the controls in the system to make it do what you want it to. So it was a combination. There were some off-the-shelf aspects to it, but then there was a lot of configuration because the application itself interfaced with many internal and external applications. So all the courts and a city prosecutor, there was a lot of different various interfaces. So it was a highly configured application.
Wow, so that sounds like a real jumble that you were trying to, document and understand who's doing what and what the data, the validity of the data and how they're sharing data. That must have taken forever to untangle that.
Definitely. And I think one of the biggest hurdles that I had, though I have my IT audit certifications and I've been doing IT audits for many years, I've never been arrested before. I didn't understand the judicial system. I didn't understand a lot of the terminology that they were talking about. So it's a huge learning curve to understand the business itself.
Man, and was it, how many people were on the project?
Just me and my project leader.
What?
And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Yellowbook-CPE, the heroes behind the jumbo bundle of self-study courses. With a 1-year subscription, you get access to over 170 hours of top-notch CPE content. Dive into thrilling tales of agile, IT auditing, fraud, and internal controls. All courses carry NASBA's quality seal, so you know they've got the superpower of trustworthiness. Just click the link in the description to sign up. And now, back to our story.
So it was a lot. It took us about beginning to end just over a year, which is very long for the audits we do. And about 500 plus hours.
Yeah, easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we didn't even get into the entire system. When we think about these systems for the police department, they cover everything from the time that a 911 call, gets referred to an officer down to when the case is adjudicated, and there's lots of steps in between.
Well, how did you narrow your scope then? How did you get to a more finite project so you could actually get it done in a year?
Yeah, we decided to focus on these citations because that was a known issue that the city municipal court had already identified. This idea of the duplicate citations coming through or individuals showing up to court but no records in their system. So that was our starting point.
Okay.
And then from there, we expanded into some just general controls about the system, like user access, who can do what within the system that's maybe causing these duplicate entries.
Okay.
So that was our biggest focus in, because one of the things when the municipal court figured out the data was wrong, they shut off the interface and went back to manual processing. So they had to hire temp and contractors to manually process these tickets. So we found that would potentially have the biggest impact to review that area so that we could eliminate all those manual processes that they had to implement.
Which is really slow too.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay, so what were your significant findings? What kind of stuff did you say in your audit report?
And I think most of our findings related to creating processes for the police department to be reviewing the activity that was happening in the system, from identifying are there citations that aren't being submitted, they're just staying in maybe a draft mode, identifying who has access to do what in the system. And so we were able to provide them some examples where, for example, anytime the police department engages with an individual, there's a database. They call it the master name index. And one of the problems in the system is anytime an officer ran into Lita, they'd put Lita's name in the system. And so there end up being thousands of instances, depending on how often they ran into an individual. So we identified one individual alone with 71 different records.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. And so all of those records would never tell the full story, maybe, of what that individual's situation was criminally. Another example is there was 18,000 records of Walmart. I can tell you there's not 18,000 Walmarts in the city of Phoenix. There's only 15.
You mean every time they responded to something at Walmart, they'd put Walmart records in there?
Yes.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
so when they were trying
How many
to...
thousand? You said 18,000 Walmart records?
18,000.
Oh,
Yeah.
Lordy. Oh, my goodness. Wow.
So that duplication of not just the locations, obviously that makes it challenging itself, but the individuals themselves too. How do I, as an officer, know I'm picking the right Stacey Linch? Because there's more than one.
Mhm.
So it could really impact how, that person's information in the system, what it was listing for their history. And so a lot of recommendations and findings related to making sure the system itself has the basic controls to prevent the data from being wrong. So another example we identified was in the module where they document what evidence was obtained. Well, Officer Joe enters in all the information, that how much money was seized or what the color of the shirt was. But unfortunately, Officer David could later go back in and potentially edit that record.
Oh,
They had no idea. So really locking down the system to prevent that type of
wow.
unintentional, potentially,
What kind of control did they put in place so that, like, if you arrested me, didn't have 71 records? What control was that prevented that from happening?
Well, what they ended up doing is restricting who could merge records together. And then the control ended up being at the process level by teaching officers, don't just pick the first one that comes up in the list. You have to do your due diligence to look through the information. So it was on two sides, controlling who could create new records, who could combine records, and then teaching the officers how to use the system correctly.
Wow. Okay. So even after they implemented, how'd they respond to your recommendations? Were they pleased to have them, or were they like, oh no, another thing I've got to do?
I think it was a combination of both, to be honest. There was 22 audit recommendations, and I think they were just overwhelmed. They knew they had a problem, and it's kind of like, where do I even begin?
Yeah.
And they knew they didn't have the resources. So it was going to take additional funding from the city to bring in the right staffing. It even, because of the severity of the findings we were seeing, the city hired a consultant to do a more in-depth review, which I thought was great because, one, they substantiated all of our findings. That's always nice as an auditor to know you got it right. But they had the expertise to really dig into the process.
Okay.
So the long run, the department, I think, was overwhelmed, but they knew they had to get it fixed. And it gave them a little bit of a starting point because our scope was so narrowed.
Okay. Then the consultant took over to help them really change up their processes. And how long did it take them before they were able to clear all those findings?
Well, most of the findings were going to need to be remediated through acquiring a new system.
Oh,
unfortunately, the system they had was never going to be able to be configured to meet our needs. But then there was also federal regulations related to reporting that this system did not have the capacity to meet, which could impact funding to the city. So this audit was in 2017. And as of today, they are still working on implementing the new system. It's not something that can be done overnight,
Yeah.
but, hopefully it will be done with next year.
Okay.
It's very complex. There's a lot of stakeholders. And
Wow. That is very complex. So that basically they whoever chose the initial software off the shelf missed it in a way. It wasn't the right thing. And then they did some custom programming, and then they tried to use it and ran into a lot of problems.
yeah, when you don't want to change your processes,
Yeah.
because you think what you're doing is working, then you're going to run into those challenges. And when you're trying to change a staff of several thousand officers and how they do stuff, that's a battle in itself.
Yes. I just had that conversation with somebody yesterday because the only recommendation they could think of was to do training. But training, as you and I know, doesn't usually solve anything for the long run because people turn over, people forget to do things. And so it's better to have some kind of edit function or some kind of harder control that prevents the behavior, But maybe in this case, there wasn't anything to be done.
Well, I think part of the problem they knew going into it is how do you train, over 3,000 people in a short amount of time, where those 3,000 people are supposed to be out there protecting the community.
Right.
It's very hard. So they ended up providing training to the officers on the system before it was even finished. And then the system went live over a year later. And I can tell you, I'm getting older. I don't remember last week, let alone last year.
That's right.
So a lot of hurdles that we created for ourselves. But I think one of the things that I'm excited about where this project led the city, it was just a piece of changing how we did things when it comes to implementing our systems. We don't just run with it, and we really put some thought into it. We're creating business requirements, and we're hiring QAs throughout the process to make sure we're staying on track with what we needed to do, which is something that wasn't structurally done throughout the city. And now I see it all the time when we're going and looking at these new systems that the city's purchasing. There's this common practice of how they're implementing it.
Well, who's spearheading that effort? Did you guys help them lay out what it should look like, the process of implementing a new software, or is it the work of a consultant, or is there a champion for that in the city?
It's a combination of all of it, really. There were definitely some key consultants that came in and gave us the guidance that as an organization we needed. But, really the city manager's office, in collaboration with our CIO, were the collaborators, them spearheads of this.
Okay.
Because the city manager, my thought is they were tired of spending money to fix these systems. And then you have this, chief information officers tired of putting these weak systems into our, computer environment that could impact things. So,
yeah.
And then from the audit perspective, what we really found was we needed to be able to provide something in this process. And so what we started doing is developing a non-audit service to where we go through from hopefully the beginning of the project when those business requirements are being documented through the end when the system's going live. And we're just that silent party in the background that is monitoring, hey, is the system going to have those key controls that we want to have in place? We're not designing. We're not, a voting member of any committee. We're just listening in. And when we hear something that, doesn't sound right, like, maybe a bad example, but maybe they're not going to have, multi-factor authentication for passwords, we would probably say, you might want to look at the risks associated with not implementing that. We know what the city standards are, or potentially even what the state statutes say, so we can provide them that knowledge of maybe something they're not thinking of.
Yeah. What do you think that does? Of course, you know I was going to go here. What do you think that does to your independence in looking at this same system when it is up and running?
It's definitely a fine line. Separate from this system, I remember doing this type of consulting project with our water department. And a question came up from the company who was designing the application. And they're like, I don't know, Stacey, what do you think? And I'm like, I'm not the person that can answer this question. You need to talk to the business owner, the data owner.
Yeah.
So it really takes that discipline on the auditor's level to know when to draw that line.
Yes.
But still provide value.
Yeah. Because the city really needs that objectivity as they're going through the software system. Because if it took from 2018 when they decided to switch over, let's say, until now, you can't wait until it's all over to help. You have to have projects as you go.
Yeah, and the last thing that the client wants is for us to come back later and tell them they did it wrong.
Oh, yeah.
So, we have a team of IT auditors who understand, basic application controls. They don't understand every system, but they know that you shouldn't be able to type letters in a social security number field, those input controls, and then they look at output and processing. So just to kind of follow along the project. And then every once in a while we have to raise the red flag and say, hey, you might want to think about this.
Now, how do you do that? Do you do that formally in a memo? Do you just bring it up in the meeting? What do you do with that when the red flag gets raised? How do you do that?
It's both. We bring it up right away. We're not like most auditors. You shouldn't be trying to shock the client and tell them anything they don't already know when you issue your report. But with these projects, what we're doing is issuing quarterly memos to the stakeholders, letting them know here's how things are going. And we try to identify a handful of controls in the application that we're going to monitor throughout. And that list, unfortunately, seems to get longer and longer. We're not monitoring everything. Yeah. But we say, hey, here's how things are going. And it does go down that road of how's the project management aspect going? How's the funding going? So, yeah, giving those quarterly updates to the stakeholders, I think, is helpful as well, too.
Wow. Well, what did you learn from this project? How did it help you become a better auditor? Was there anything that you did differently the next time you took on a project, or?
I think for me, it's really being honest with yourself when you know the content and when you don't, and not being afraid to say, I have no idea what they're talking about when they're talking about, booking somebody and this code and that code. So that was probably the biggest thing where I just needed to be vulnerable and say, you know what, I know technology pretty well, but I don't know your business. And I had to really earn their respect. Anyone who's done an audit in law enforcement, there is this culture of the sworn officers versus the non-sworn.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it was a combination of my, interpersonal skills just to get them to trust me, to tell me what I needed to know so I could do a good evaluation.
Okay. So it took them a while to warm up to you, and you had to be vulnerable and admit that you didn't know. But yeah, in a police situation, they're all about honor and, protecting each other in a lot of ways.
For sure.
Yeah. More than other entities that I've worked with.
Yeah, they definitely have a different culture, and to try to get your foot in that door, and that's part of the reason why the audit took so long. I went on ride-alongs with officers. I went out to the jails where people were being booked, and just trying to get enough of the story as I went through, so where I could confidently evaluate the system, and they would listen to the recommendations and know that what I was saying was accurate.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. That's a very important project that you did with some really good results for the citizens of your city. Yeah.
Well, that's with being a government auditor, I mean, I didn't want to be an auditor when I grew up. I don't know about you, but
Nope.
but to see the impact, I mean, some stuff we do, and it's okay, the recommendation is document your procedures and we move on our way. But to see nearly, 7-8 years later, the changes from our work are still being felt, not just in the police department, but throughout the city. And I'm proud of it.
Yeah, because you raised the awareness and the maturity level, control maturity level of the whole city with that audit.
Yeah. And I think other departments, were expressing issues. Like I said, a lot of this was bubbling up in the city, and we have the respect, our office does, to where we came in and we gave that independent, opinion of what was going on versus, well, this department's just complaining because they don't like something. Well, no, there's true consequences that are happening because of this.
Mm-hmm. How did you shield yourself from all that political, pointing fingers? I would assume there was probably a lot of pointing fingers because everybody knew it was messed up.
Yeah.
It's a matter of, you get each department to trust you. And so I would have one department saying, Stacey, you need to look over here, and this is bad and this is bad. And then I go talk to somebody else and like, no, you need to look over here. But then it kind of goes back to that, risk assessment methodology and be like, okay, well, is this a real issue or is this just somebody upset with the process? So going back to the core skills that we have as auditors and working with my project leader and the city auditor at that time to narrow down what we were going to focus on and keep ourselves independent from any of that backlash.
Now, was anybody unhappy with your results?
Not officially by any means.
Okay.
I'm sure the public, maybe city council, when they saw the results and saw the impact it was having, I'm sure the budget department wasn't happy because it's cost the city a lot to make this right. So I think there was that, the fallout of our audit impacted other departments and other bodies. But in the long run, I think everybody knows it's going to make things better for our community.
All right. Well, thank you. Anything else we should know about this story? That was a great story, Stacey. That's very instructive and very illuminating. And I love that long-term view that you're taking because you're taking care of the city in the long run. That's really beautiful.
Yeah. And, it's a to be continued. Like I said, they're almost done implementing the new system. And, right now we're doing that not audit service. We're monitoring it. But once it's done, we'll be back for a full audit. And hopefully things are better.
And hopefully you have 5 people on it. And you get it done in 4 months.
Yeah.
Wow. That was a lot to take on.
But I learned a lot, and I think it made me a better auditor in the long run because I really did have to adapt the way I traditionally did things.
Just in the way that you approach the client, or what is that?
Yeah, approaching the client and then knowing how to, scope things down, be able to sell that to leadership because they wanted us to go in and look at everything.
Yeah, well,
there's no way.
Yeah,
I'd still be doing the audit today.
Yeah, when you started describing it, I'm like, how did you do that? That was so huge. Yeah,
it really. Sometimes I think, my style as a person, and I see it in my peers as well, is we want to go and we want to look at everything. And we just go down that rabbit hole and then we can't get out of it. And so really restraining myself not to want to go down the sexy route.
Right. Well, that was a sexy route, but that was good that you restrain yourself. That's great. Yeah. And you got a product out that had an impact beyond just that project because it improved the system development life cycle for your whole city. So in a way, you did take care of everything by getting the
project. Thinking about it,
yeah, by getting the project done.
Yeah,
excellent work. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining us on this adventure. We appreciate your loyalty. Take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast with all your audit allies. And don't miss out on Yellowbook-CPE's upcoming webinars. Because every superhero needs their training, and Yellowbook-CPE offers continuing education that's relevant, convenient, and as thrilling as the fight for justice. Until next time, audit on!